guys, my name is Evan and I'm here with my friend Alan, and we're here to have a dialogue today. Now, a dialogue is different from a conversation in that we're really deeply listening to each other, and the hope is that we learn something from the conversation. So it doesn't have to be that we learn it right now in this moment during this dialogue, but as the coming days and weeks pass, we want to process what's happened in the conversation and come away having changed a little bit. That, I think, is the goal of a good, thoughtful, and deep conversation that I'm calling a dialogue. And the dialogue that we're going to talk about today, or the subject we're going to talk about today, is masculinity and how we've seen masculinity changing and what state masculinity is in today. Alan and I have talked a lot about this offline, and I thought it would be great to do a video on it. So welcome, Alan. It is fantastic to have you here and to be having this dialogue with you. I thought we could start just by asking the question, what do you hope for masculinity? What do you hope that a boy that's being raised today will receive in terms of messaging, social and cultural? What would be a positive outcome that may be different from what we see right now in terms of the way masculinity is treated by parents, by society?
Well, to me, that has a lot to do with what I hope for humanity and then the planet, because the masculinity and biological gendered males, to me, they converge mostly, but they're not exactly the same thing. So when you ask me about masculinity, I think of one side of the spectrum of humanity. And any conversation about a healthy masculinity, to me, means that masculinity is contributing to a healthy and thriving and positively evolving human species.
I like how broad you go with it, and I think it's true that masculinity doesn't just apply to, a boy that is raised today. Masculinity is a concept that permeates, every gender and every person to some degree. You either feel a sense of masculinity, whether you're a man or not, to some degree, or you have to deal with masculinity from other people. And what does that feel like, and what does it mean? I think is really interesting. The way that I've been thinking about it, I start from a place that I think is fairly simple, which is I have noticed that men have a lot of trouble in general processing their emotions. First being able to feel them, and then if they can actually feel them and not deny them because they're not the emotions that they feel that they're expected by either their parents or society to have, then they also have to process them after that. And that can be very, very difficult to actually look at things that are tough and do things like cry or get angry or something like that. And I mean, I think the stereotype has a lot of truth to it, that men have quite a lot of trouble with that. Whereas my friends who are female are perfectly okay crying when they're upset. It's not an uncommon thing to have a hangout where one or both of them cry, between like my wife and her female friends. And I even see it with female friends of mine. But it's much tougher to imagine a hangout that's pretty normal one. There's not some big thing that happened, someone died, where the men just kind of have a cry. And while that doesn't have to be the emotion of choice, sadness that's being processed, emotions in general, feeling and processing for men, that's been a tough thing, and not one that's necessarily desirable to have as a man for certainly my childhood and my lifetime. I mean, is that your experience too?
Well, I'm a little different because I was raised in Southern California. I guess you could describe that as a culture that prizes self-discovery and emotional expression and creativity a little bit more than the norm from what you would find in other parts of the country and within the other micronations and cultures of our country. I'm also involved with the arts and have been my entire life. So emotional expression has been a big part of that. Now, I will say that what I've experienced is, well, I experienced it last night. I'm part of a men's group, and the men, a lot of them are representing more traditional modes of masculinity. They're firefighters, policemen, first responders, businessmen, fathers. And I got on there, and something I've been learning to do again is improvise and break out in song, like what you'd see in a movie musical. And I did that, and everyone laughed and it was fun, but I immediately had like the so-called vulnerability hangover. And I had this residue from growing up. When I was in high school, I was very expressive, and I was in theater. And so other teenagers, especially guys from the football team, which is even a football team I played on, but they would always call me the F word, right? They'd always say, "Oh, Alan Gaskell's gay." And as a teenager, I found that very hurtful. And so even though I was encouraged growing up to be more expressive, I still ran into feedback sometimes as a teen and even later on, like, "Oh, that dude's weird. Oh, that dude's exuberant and emotionally expressive, or he sings or dances or whatever. That's weird." Mm-hmm. And I still have that vulnerability and that wound of being ostracized or being called a name, which is great feedback for me because that makes me go lean in more and do it anyway. I'm still trying to like heal that part of myself, that part that you made reference to, which is like, whoa, our culture seems not to value certain kinds of expression from gendered males, and then it values others.
Yeah. Well, and that's something that I've always noticed about you too, is that's part of your nature, is you're extroverted, you have, you're in touch with the side of you that when you meet actors, you would see, where you have more physical expression. You're a musician. I mean, you're good at all this stuff. And to me, that makes you particularly interesting. And not just because those things are fun, but because it's very different. And you point to such a great cultural difference that it's like, I got to remember who I'm talking to. A person that grew up in the LA area, and who is in like, I don't know if you were in like a drama society or club or something like that, is going to see that that's okay more. I mean, there wasn't anything like that where I grew up. There was no like, I mean, there was plays, but most of the guys wouldn't be a part of it. And I know we've come a long way. Like, I really believe that this generation is just so much more accepting. It's a totally different world from East Coast, Long Island, where I grew up. But it was more acceptable for you, but you still have that wound, it sounds like, because there's enough just everywhere you go in the culture that says men can't be as expressive.
Yeah. It's an interesting challenge, because even though my parents were together and my father provided very well for us, I didn't spend much time with my father. Now, this is a key difference from our ancestors and how we were before the industrial societies. Like, boys used to grow up around the women, and then they were taken out by the men to get a rite of passage, and they'd spend time in just a world of men, and they would learn how to be a man by watching men. Mm-hmm. They'd spend time with their dads and uncles, but also they'd get to see what all the different flavors of masculinity are in a community.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, here's one way of being a man. There's the singing, dancing guy. There's the warrior, and there's the craftsman, and there's the grumpy, the grumpy shaman who lives on the edge of the village. But for us, and for me, Because my dad went to work every day, put his head down at a desk, and came home often very cranky and tired and crabby, not wanting to see the things I wanted to show him. No, not because he didn't like me or was being mean, but he was tired out.
Yeah.
Right. And so my view of masculinity was essentially shaped by my mother's view of my father and my mother's view of the world and of men. Right. And based on speaking to a lot of men, this is a pretty common experience in our culture, is we as boys grow up without having like a really fleshed out conception of masculinity from the viewpoint of masculinity. We always see it through the eyes of the women, because as children we grow up among women, or the mother's friends who drove the carpool, right? And a lot of our teachers, especially in primary school, are women, and it's a whole world of women. So this is also problematic because we're encouraged to be this way and that way, all these influences, but the vectors, I feel, are very unbalanced due to the lack of real time and connection spent with fathers and other men.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. And you and I have that in common, is that we didn't see our dad as much as we would like. And that is something that, as a dad of a 2-year-old right now, I think about so much, and I spend every single moment with my son I can. I probably over compensate because I know how important that time is. But you're making me think about this concept of the many different flavors of masculinity. It's almost a separate subject that you need a lot of time with both of your parents. You need attention just to build that sense of security in you, and your self-esteem, to know you're loved and worthy of attention. But to also just get exposure to many different types of people that, in older societies, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, would occur in your direct community in the town or something like that. I suppose there's a number of different ways, even in a more dispersed society like we have today, that you can have exposure to many different men. But I wonder if kids today are getting encouraged about that, because you can be exposed to many different types of men, but there can be a modeling or a subtle message like, well, your dad is the real type of guy. This is the way guys are supposed to be. But I like the idea of it being like, it's a whole variety. I mean, you're a person before a man or a woman, and you are going to have the biological part of you, and what does that need to look like? I'd say nothing in particular, but I think taking the shame part out of it is what's hard. For some reason, we think some behaviors are shameful. You were saying it around being more expressive or dramatic, and I've certainly felt that way. I didn't cry probably for like 15 years of my life, when I was most confused through my 20s and teenage years and stuff, and I just couldn't find it. And I wish I had had a model of that in a man who was okay with that. Because if you don't cry, it hurts you. It's like, I just imagine, people that are more comfortable with it, especially women, are kind of walking around like, well, yeah, of course. I mean, but to guys, it's like a novel idea. At least I think. I mean, is that your experience?
Yeah, crying and emotional expression. I think it is a novel experience, because it seems to me that I've met many men who don't even know what they're feeling.
Right.
They have they're actually they're incapable at their current state of actually feeling into things, not out of malice or sociopathy, but it's very complicated. I mean, we also have a situation where kids grow up, for example, being their parents' emotional caretakers, right? And making sure everything's okay for everybody else. They grow up and they're used to taking care of other people, but they don't quite know what they're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And without some, psychotherapy, as we know,
Mm-hmm.
or some kind of personal encounter with the emotions, you're right. People don't cry. It's got to come out somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And these unexpressed feelings and things in us will express in other ways, often in passive aggression,
Mm-hmm.
or or dividing oneself off and sneaking away to indulge in some addiction or other, non-life-giving behavior. um, like, we must feel, we know this as human beings, but it's just a matter of like, if we're going to feel it here or find a way to express what's inside of us in some other way.
Yeah, I wish it was more obvious to people, because I think you have like really strict Western medicine types that would not admit that bottling up your emotions causes stress and literally causes illness. Um, I don't know how many studies, I'm sure there's been some studies on it, but to me, you don't need a study. That's like one of the most obvious things in the world. But I almost wish there was a biological sign like hunger, when you have like unconscious or just unexpressed emotion, that would at least like a meter would go up or something would just make it clear, okay, I need to do this. And I think we'd have a much healthier society. And I think, men in particular could really, really use that, because yeah, I mean, we tend to walk around not knowing what's going on a lot of the time. I mean, it's hard to find real emotional awareness in a guy. And I hate to generalize like that, but I'm comfortable with this generalization because of how rare it is that I meet somebody where I feel like they can tell in real time what's going on. It doesn't mean you have to say it out loud, but um, when I get close to men, I don't often find that that's accessible to them.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of fear, I think, in many men around even feeling what they're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had a funny, I mean, to illustrate the point,
Mm-hmm.
one of the guys from my men's community that I'm a part of came over to my house because we were working on a project for the business of the community, which, it's like, workshops and whatever. I was helping this guy with some video editing, and he came over and told me the news that one of the men in our community had died the previous night suddenly of a heart attack while taking an evening stroll with his 10-year-old daughter.
Oh, God.
I mean, a really beautiful man, a lifelong educator. He was only 50 years old.
Hmm.
And I had a connection with this man. Well, the gentleman who was with me kind of mentioned, oh, yeah, this happened. And then he just went straight on into the business at hand of video editing. Not out of malice. And he was connected to this guy too. But I just said, hey, man, wait, what? He died? And the guy was like, yes. And then he kind of realized, oh, I just totally blew over something of consequence, and I didn't even realize it because I wasn't feeling anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took a moment, and then we came back, and I talked about him for a little bit, and then my associate started talking about like his lifelong dreams of, being a movie director and everything. And I was like, my soul was like reaching out to like wring his neck, and again, this is a very, very good man. And I got a handle on myself. I didn't lash out at him, but the whole episode left me with this awareness, like, wow.
Yeah. Okay, so this may be going in a direction you weren't going to go, but I'm so curious about it. When you have so many incidents like that, and I'm like not even surprised to hear that, unfortunately, that an incident like that would occur. What do you do? Let's say if you're a parent or a teacher or somebody like that, when you have kids that are really young, like I'm feeling like modeling always works better than teaching. And I'm also thinking that we often try to protect kids and hide them from our emotions or hide our emotions from them. So I think it's probably would be a really good idea if we're really upset, and hopefully it's nothing that's like too much for the child to handle, because there are some things that are like adult and too advanced of a complex, difficult issue to deal with, but to be able to feel emotions, good or bad. And I think I can be guilty of this a bit as well, because I just want our son to be surrounded by happiness so much. And if I'm like in a bad mood, sometimes I'll be like, oh, I don't want to give him that. He's such a happy kid. But, you know, my wife reminds me, and I'm lucky she does this, that no, he should be able to see what, you know, his role model looks like when he's not in a good place. Because guess what? He's going to be in a not good place at some point as well. So the whole, I think I need to do a better job of modeling the range of emotions, including sadness and other things that he has to feel because he's human. So yeah, modeling comes to mind. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but like, what do we do about this? Yeah.
The first thing is that children already know what you're feeling, whether you're being real about it or not. That's one of the things about kids, right? Is they always know what's going on.
Yeah.
They don't know the adult details, but they can feel if something's wonky or weird in the house. A lot of young children's personalities take formation in response to things like this. I mean, let's say, you know, a mother and father have open hostility with each other that just doesn't get expressed verbally, but they walk around the house and it's just the electricity in the air, and the child,
they can tell,
grows up just like, So, I mean, if you're talking about modeling, I'm not a parent, right? It's like I'm so-called, you know, the man in the audience watching the people like you who are in the ring. So take what I say with a grain of salt. I find that there's this thing called the wild man energy. And the wild man energy is different from savage man energy, right? Savage man is like acting out, throwing things, and just like, bleh. But the wild man is the one who can say, you know what? Daddy feels very mad right now, and he also feels a little bit scared. So I love you very much, but right now I'm going to go be by myself because I feel sad and mad. I love you, and I'll be right back after I take care of myself. That's very direct. It's very wild. And it also doesn't have any, it's not influenced by, like parents a lot of the time, they say things to their kids because they want to be perceived as good parents by other people, right? Or they want to be thought of as one who's a good parent. And there's this level of inauthenticity. But the wild man energy is authentic. And it's just like, hey, this is what I'm feeling right now. I feel really sad.
Why is it called wild man? That should be healthy man.
Because that's at the heart of a healthy masculinity, is wild man energy.
Okay, I like it.
Yeah, so men are made up of two components. They're made up of the cultural part, the human culture, right? About be nice and be good and be industrious. But they also bring in a wildness because we are wild creatures of our Mother Earth. We are wild beings, you know, the skin, we grow hair, we sweat, we have emotions, we're wild. And that's one of the big tasks of a man, I think, is to integrate the wild man with the cultural man. And when the wild man can be reintegrated back into the civilized man, you end up with something that approximates an authentic person.
Let me think about this concept for a moment. Wild man. Maybe I'm just not as in touch with the primal side, but I'm not like feeling like I need to scream all the time. Like when I'm angry, like I guess I have ways to express it. I do express my emotions. I get how messy life is. I don't know. It sounds so primal, but I don't feel like an out of control primalness, I guess. Do you feel that?
No.
Okay, so is it already integrated? Is that what you think?
You know, you mentioned the primal scream, which is actually, I think, a workshop that people can do, or they do it in one of like the Mankind Project rite of initiation thing.
Okay.
Uh, I think the primal scream and like the violence might be. Oh, that's my doggy, a wild creature. The primal screaming might be part of the process of breaking through the calcified layer of over civilization, where the wild person has been caged and suppressed deep down inside. The maybe the first part of breaking through and getting out and sweating and feeling something might take the form of something more bombastic, like wild screaming and thrashing, or like being in the woods under the moonlight, beating on drums. You know, wild man, the wild man is, in my conception, is something that might include that as a facet or a possibility, but something, something else.
You know, when I think about that, for some reason, images floating into my mind of like when you think of the really primal way of behaving, it almost feels like people that can't express their emotions need that more, because there are ways to do that. There are ways to really, really let loose. We all like to let loose, but like there are ways to like really let loose. And I feel like you wouldn't need that as much if you can deal with your emotions more healthily. I mean, I don't want to pass a judgment on people that do that sort of thing, but I can't help but feel that way. I don't know. Do you agree with that?
I think it's every one of us is a process of becoming. You know, the acorn, which has encoded in it the oak tree, which is growing. And I don't know, all the different ways of people becoming are just beyond my ability to comprehend.
Yeah.
Because I'll go 2 blocks out of my house here in Hollywood, California,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll see somebody living on the street in the depths of a really, really tough situation.
Mm-hmm.
Substance abuse, homelessness. And even then, I was like, I know it's true. Like they're in a process of becoming as well, going through this part of their journey. And surely the looks of it, doesn't seem like it's right. And then I also know it's like, well, there are a lot of things I don't understand, right? Most things.
Yeah.
But the savage is, I think, what you're touching on. The savage man is very different from the wild man. And the savage man, I think, strikes more to the heart of that part of our social conversation about the toxic masculine.
Mm-hmm.
Violence, abuse, exploitation, power grabs, and greed, and whatever that is. The savage man is an expression of the unhealthy man. It's the unpsychologically healed person. It's the unintegrated person.
Mm-hmm.
And I, you know, you are a very formal professional person, but one of the things I've appreciated in our friendship is it has become evident from some of your business stories that your wild man is definitely part of your approach to life and business. And I would even say maybe sometimes the savage man, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that is, but seeing that you've had wildness and the willingness to defend your home and your kingdom at all costs,
Mm-hmm.
that really inspired me.
Well,
Really
yeah. Well, I think most of the time I find that it pays to be not totally formal, friendly and stuff like that, but more buttoned up, because you just have people are not like forthright about how they feel in the moment, what they're going through, nor necessarily should they be, but you just have no idea. So you just kind of want to stay in bounds. At least I find, especially in business. But it's so critical that I'm able to separate from that. And I actually think this is a problem that probably many people, but certainly many men have, where you finish your work for the day, where you've needed to be quite formal and stay within the bounds of acceptability all the time. And you're just like, yeah, now I just want to be like a real person. And if I'm pissed at something, I want to curse, and um, maybe I want to like get drunk or something like that. And you like need to always live with the permission to do that under the surface, even while you're actively trying to not do that and be a good cultural or business related person. But it's so critical to stay in touch with that part. And I think, and I appreciate you pointing it out, I'm very much in touch with the fact that certain things piss me off, and certain things make me so happy that I'm just shedding tears of happiness, especially like my son. That's easy for me. And yeah, sometimes I'm petty and all these things, and I'm like, it's important that I always think it's important that I make room for that. Just know that, like, yeah, I can try to be buttoned up and doing the right thing all the time, but it doesn't work a lot of the time, and as my wife will happily tell me. So.
Yeah. Our wives, aren't they such an important part of this process of discovering how to express and manifest manhood properly?
Yeah, really, and I think particularly because, and this is one reason I love my wife, is that she'll hello puppy, this is a wonderful moment of masculinity, by the way. I'm appreciating it a lot. She will happily call me out, and that's one of the reasons I knew I could marry her, because I can think I've got everything under control, and I like having things under control. She will just let me know, nope, you're doing that like crap, or you're acting ridiculously just now. And I was like, what? I thought, but okay. But we need that. You're right. I mean, I'm with you on that, even though I don't like it in the moment.
This is a little bit of maybe a sideways turn. I think one of the big ways that the potential for improvement in men in our culture manifests is in our romantic relationships. I've heard from many women over the years, they have this thing where they're like, are there any like men around? Because every relationship I get into, I feel like I'm raising a child. So this is a very, very interesting feedback from the female gendered creatures of our species. And what's that all about? Like, what do you think that's about?
I think it's about the same thing we're talking about, that a lot of times men are encouraged socially to kind of act immature. Now, it is fun to act immature sometimes, but if you're doing it all the time in an intimate relationship, that means that like there's a level of like responsibility you haven't accepted, or something like that. And so that's one angle, is like actually men have a lot of trouble expressing emotions like we've been talking about. And therefore, because they don't know what they're feeling, they might act out in certain ways, and it feels like, oh, I'm raising a child. So I think that's one thing that they might be talking about. But I also think that men often are not as not responsible. They're not as good at certain societal things. And, you know, I don't want to generalize too much, but it just seems to be that so many of the men I hang around, like, um, all of our wives or partners will criticize the same thing, which is like, we can't find things when we're, you know, we can't find like the ketchup or something like that in the refrigerator or whatever. And even though it's right in front of us. And yeah, like my wife is better at thinking of like ways to prepare our son for preschool and stuff like that. Like she thinks of everything. She thinks of the doctor's appointments. I could do it. It takes more brain power. It's not how I'm oriented. And I think she might say that I'm, uh, you know, she feels like she has to drag me along like I'm a kid in that way. And I almost wonder, I don't know if it's biological or cultural or something, but that seems to be very common, at least in my group of people that I hang out with.
Hmm.
Do you relate to that?
Yeah. Yeah. I just thought of like, you know, the sheet that goes on top of the mattress that has the elastic on it?
Oh yeah, yeah. Fitted.
Like, you can't just fold those. You
Oh
can't
yeah.
fold these things. You need to like the two of you need to like put your finger into where the corners are, put the corners together, and then because it's like a rounded elasticy thing, you can't just fold it because once you fold it, just like a regular sheet, it's all wrinkled and effed up, and then you put it in the drawer, and then my wife would be like, "That's not how you fold sheets. What's wrong with you? Isn't it obvious?" I'm like, "It's got elastic, but it's a sheet. So you fold it like a sheet, then you move on to like, writing essays and making videos." And she's like, "No, no." So there's a level of, I think, domestication that is entailed.
Wait,
Uh,
she knows how to fold a sheet that has the wrinkled corners? How?
yeah,
I thought that was impossible, and no human knows how to do that.
dude, no. And this, I mean, this issue overlaps with just differences, general differences in men and women from a very general perspective, but it has probably a lot to do with trait conscientiousness, right, and orderliness. She beats me in both categories because we both took the 5 aspect scale,
Mhm,
psychological
mhm.
uh, personality profile test. So I don't know, but this thing of domestication relates to the over civilization of guys, which also results in their bad behavior. Because if the wild man's not integrated, savage man comes out. And in our culture, he doesn't always come out as like obviously savage, like getting drunk and getting into fistfights at the bar or slapping the wife. He usually comes out in our culture of nice guys in the form of like, "Oh yeah, sure, honey, I'll do that. But I'm gonna be passive aggressive and nasty and just drag my feet the entire time because you're oppressing me."
Hmm.
Or the guy would be like, "Oh yeah, sure, honey. Yeah, no, no, absolutely. Let's have that baby shower over here. I'll wear my purple shirt from Bonobos. It'll be really nice." And then he just like dashes into the corner and is like looking at porn, you know. It's he's like, "Oh sure, honey, no, I'm just working late tonight." And he has an affair, or he's like, "Oh yeah, yeah, sure, honey, I'm just gonna stay here another hour with the boys." And then he's like smoking all this weed with his boys in the garage on the side. Is like, these are more the savage traits of guys in our culture.
Yeah, I was gonna say that this guy is very troubled. He's either not in the right relationship or he doesn't know how to communicate.
There is no right relationship for him
Mm,
until he stops being a nice guy and integrates his psyche, both
mm,
wild and the civilized side. Otherwise, he's going to be like a domesticated little yes man whelp, pushover nice guy
mhm,
who's secretly harboring all this passive aggression and resentment inside of him. I think
mhm,
this is my take on it. And it is also highly influenced from my journey of becoming a psychologically integrated person.
mm.
Something still definitely in process. And I have some notes from the journey.
Hmm. No, but I definitely get your overall point that you start going off the rails when you're not able to have basic expression, and that's just it's an integrated part of your life, which should be simple, but people feel shame around a lot of things that should be simple. Like we say crying, and for some reason I think of crying as like this extreme thing, when really it should be a very basic thing. But that's not the only thing that could be basic. It could be like having conflict. The caricature of the dude that you just gave really doesn't like conflict. And yet, by avoiding conflict so long, he sets himself up for the massive conflict with his wife one day when she realizes how different he is in his, most personal life that's separate from her.
Often it surfaces in the woman's life in the form of finding her partner looking at porn, or finding text messages from some person he met on Tinder.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the things guys do in secret in order to get some kind of emotional energy for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, they struggle with expressing what's going on right here in the present moment. And it's no easy thing, right? There's all this anxiety and shame and terror. The response to being authentic for a lot of guys is literally instantiated into the cells. It's like fight or flight, and being afraid to make her mad seems like a life or death matter to the body. It seems like, whoa, this is really serious. It's like just getting a guy to be able to say in the moment, you know what I'm feeling right now? Like, I don't want to go to the baby shower. I want to stay at home and meet up with the guys.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. It's like to be real and be like, you know what? I love you. And I don't want to go to a baby shower. If I went with you, I wouldn't be happy. I'd be annoyed. It wouldn't be good company. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going. I love you so much.
Right. But then he has to be okay with her being mad, because she might rightfully be mad that he committed to go, or it's a good idea to go for societal reasons. You don't offend people. She may have every reason to be mad. Whoa. And he has every reason to feel the way he does. And then they have to negotiate from there. Both of them are doing okay. I think that's what can get lost. And by the way, it's not easy. So like when I'm the one on one of those sides, it's not like I'm having an easy time. Like, oh, all I need to do is say what I'm feeling. And now everything's going to be negotiated quietly. Like that's the hope. That's the goal. But yeah, I just want to stand up for the theoretical, the wife or whatever in that scenario, because they both have a point of view. He may be uncomfortable with his point of view, but then after that, there is some conflicts. Like we have to be comfortable with that. And there's negotiation. And it would be helpful if both partners are just like, okay, we're going to negotiate this and we'll try to be fair over the longer term in all of the negotiations we need to have being in a relationship.
Mm-hmm. You know, it would be cool in that scenario to me, because you shared like, oh, she would rightfully be upset. Mm-hmm. And that was an area where I'm like, And it also depends on where your values are. But let's say in this scenario, the guy said, honey, I'm not going to the baby shower. Mm-hmm. I really, really don't like baby showers. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to be the only man there. I'm not interested. I'm not going. I love you. I love you, but I'm going to stay here and energize myself because it's Sunday and I go to work tomorrow. And this is what I need for my well-being. Mm-hmm. Now she can get mad, but she can also feel mad and be like, oh, I was really looking forward to going together because I wanted Darlene and Michelle to meet you. And I feel really sad about that. Mm-hmm. I don't like how this feels. Now that lady, that's a pretty cool thing. She's not negating her feelings. She's expressing them, but she's also not like coming after another human being for being authentic. you know?
Yes, true. I think my point was mainly that she has the right to be mad. Now, that doesn't mean she has to be mad in like a harmful way or an overly extreme way given the circumstance. Like, I love your version that you just gave of an understanding, bummed out, but gonna live with it, understands that that works. Yeah, I just think it's right. I just wanted to stand up for the idea that she could be angry. And then I think you're taking it from the point of after the anger, what does she do with it? Which is a fairly sophisticated thing to do. I mean, credit to those who are able to control their emotions or at least channel them properly, you know, or at least be like, I'm going to be angry for a little bit. I'll be like 15 minutes, you know, just I'm going to be pissed about this because I was hoping to introduce you to someone, you know. But
I think what you're touching on here is like, it's really interesting. We started this conversation about feelings, right?
mm-hmm.
You think about a lot of our reactive behaviors stem from being unwilling to feel what we're feeling. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's like the guy says, let's say the guy just says, yes, I'll go to the baby shower. I'll put my purple shirt on.
Mm-hmm.
And he's inside, his body's just screaming no, right? Then he doesn't like the way that feels. And so as he's going, she puts the egg salad in his hands and they're walking out to the Subaru Forester, right? And she's like, oh, honey, can you go back inside? I left the mayonnaise. And he's like, God, you're always leaving things. Kind of like, am I just like your little errand boy? And she's like, whoa, dude. Whoa. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What is wrong with you now? Because she's like, dude, you said you're coming to the baby shower and we're going. And now, like, you're all twisted up inside and I have to like sit next to you for a 15-minute car ride. It's like, it's not fair to her, you
Right.
know?
That would be unfortunate because he's acting emotionally irresponsibly there. Yeah.
It's so tough. But then let's say he says, hey, I love you. I really don't want to go to that baby shower. I want to stay here and energize myself and get some reading done. I'll see you when we get back. I'll make dinner. And she'll be like, oh, I feel. If she accepts herself, it's the way before. But if she's like, what? No, you're coming to the thing, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
she's hurt because
Mm-hmm.
she was excited to have him come, but she's not being willing to feel what she's feeling. And then she's like, you always do this. And then like the stories start and you're like, okay. And then the two of them have a thing.
Mm.
I don't know.
Well, it goes both ways. I think that's the
Yeah.
important thing is that this is not recognizing how you feel and like acting out.
And then when we don't recognize how we feel, we
Mhm.
make the people around us responsible for our emotions.
Right. Exactly. That's a great point. And so many people are like just barely consciously aware of this and they're just doing all this work for you and they don't realize, and it's like you may not realize that they don't want to hang out with you that much anymore because even though they may not be able to consciously express it, when they hang out with you, they're always having to account for your passive aggressiveness or the things that are unexpressed that are clearly there and having to tiptoe around you. And, you know, I've been in relationships like this where it's like, I'm like, seems like a lot of work just to like sit in a room with that person. And yeah, it's because when people don't do the work, sometimes you have to, if you're around them, you have to pick up the work for them and they don't realize that. Yeah, I love that point.
Oh, it's like what you said. It's a really cool opportunity for us to express the wild man. Like, let's say your friend is just suffering from incredible envy of how much better you're doing than him in business or whatever. And you go out to coffee
Mm-hmm.
and you just feel this tension, this vibe,
Mm-hmm.
right? The wild man's like, hey, something feels off. You angry with me? What's
Mm-hmm.
going on? You know, instead of also participating in the obfuscation and the tiptoeing,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like wild man is like, hey, like wild man's also like, Evan, man, I love you. But the way you conducted yourself on that client call was what left a lot to be desired, bro. that person got off the call and they totally don't want to pick up the account anymore.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on? It's like the willingness to basically engage with conflict and say something that might be uncomfortable, but necessary. I don't know.
Well, I like what you're saying. As long as the person doing the criticizing is also open to what the other person has to say, because they could not be 100% correct in their criticism, and it's hard to hear criticism, and you have to, like, that's just like, we're in such advanced social behavior when someone can criticize you without fear of conflict, or just like, it's easier not to, so I won't. And then you can hear the criticism and respond in a healthy way, like, you're right, and not just be a pushover, like, oh my God, they had the guts to criticize me, I better say you're right away. Like, they should think and evaluate, but that's the time you got to just stop and think and just be like,
you're absolutely spot on that the person administrating the feedback isn't there to control someone, but to be open to the dialogue and
right.
to be open to whatever comes back. I have this great client who's an executive coach, and I've learned so much from him because he builds collaborative teams. And a big part of this is learning how to administer feedback to each other. And he was telling me about this client he's just on-ramping. The organization has all these issues. And he had a moment where the client, the senior VP herself, sent him an email basically scolding him in front of someone else because she misinterpreted something. And I was like, oh my God, that sounds like such a headache. Why would you actually like agree to work with people like this? He's like, because the way people behave in all their communications is going to express what's wrong inside the company, inside the family, whatever. And so the thing he did was he said, hey, let's talk on the phone. And when they talked, he gave her feedback. He's like, hey, that was really inappropriate. And it's not necessary. I certainly own the fact that I probably did XYZ wrong. And do you notice that this manner of, speaking to people is what's connected to the big problem that we're trying to address?
That's really smart.
I don't know if I could do that kind of work, man. Like an executive coach sounds prestigious, but really to roll up your sleeves and go into an organization, it's basically like being a social worker going into a dysfunctional family.
Yeah, or a marriage and family therapist or something. I mean, I think it probably gives them a lot of satisfaction to know that they have the type of vision to see the problems that other people don't. I mean, they're just looking a level deeper in terms of like what's going on unconsciously, and then a level more broad in terms of what's happening in terms of the group system, what would be a family system, which is now like the business system or the business's system. So that takes a lot of skill. But something I was thinking about when you were telling that story, I was like impressed with the story, but I couldn't help thinking about how adept and skillful and probably like aware of those facts the executive coach in the situation would be, to then know that you're a human and you're not going to be aware of your behavior all the time, and you're going to fall prey to the exact same thing that you teach about. I find that tough because I feel like, oh, I do a good job in business of moderating certain situations. Not perfect, but I generally do a good job. And sometimes I can have a blind spot to things, and it's like very humbling. And I think I'm still working on that, is not being defensive and being like open to the fact that the thing that I'm supposed to be good at, sometimes I drop the ball on.
So you've shared something with me in the past, which is like you're an entrepreneur and you've always been a person who wants to chart his own path and to go his own way and not our boss.
Right.
And then having a business, at times, certain clients with their levels of however demanding they are, they can rub up against that old preference for something different. And you've also shared how you've worked through that and been able to kind of like heal that a little bit, or just be like, oh, right, this is the old,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Oh my God. Yeah. I feel like I've come such a long way in like understanding. It's like understanding people. This helps me in my communication and like my marriage and with friends, but it totally extends to the business world where like things come up and being understanding tends to work out better than just being like, wait, this is what we were supposed to be doing. And the course is already set in motion and everything like that. Because I've learned that the business world is small. Relationships can last a really, really long time, including some that you don't expect to last as long as they do. And showing more human understanding, it goes a long way. And sometimes you are the one that needs it, and you're happy that you're going around giving it too. That has taken me a long time to feel. I mean, when I was a younger CEO, that was not obvious to me. It didn't matter to me, I guess. And I don't think it produced good outcomes ultimately.
Yeah. Man, God bless anybody who can help us see our blind spots.
I know.
That's all we have.
Yeah. So any parting thoughts, since we probably should wrap up in just a few minutes? Masculinity. We've come a long, windy way. I really like where the conversation went. It ultimately kind of left us in a place where we're like, man, there's a lot of complexity to understanding your emotions as a man and being able to take criticism, being able to give criticism, finding your strength, not getting too savage about it. I don't know. Anything that you're left with right now?
Until very recently, I was very fearful of men,
Hmm.
groups of men. I've always, in the past, gotten on so much with women, their way of talking and touching, and expressing feelings to each other and sharing emotions. And I got to say, man, it's still such a journey. But I can say now, I love people. I love God. I love the planet. I love life. And I'm learning that I have a great love in my heart for men and for the boys of all ages who are becoming men.
Yeah. That's wonderful. I relate to you. I just want to take that in for a second because I'm like relating, but I'm also like, that's quite an amazing statement to be able to make, long journey, ups, downs, everything like we all have. And, you see the problematic parts of men, which you would want to be different, and at least the men that you've encountered in your life. And it sounds like you're at a place where you're able to say, I think I see men for flaws, problems that they have, and the good. And there's so much good in so many of like the individuals, but I think you're talking about the masculine side that at one point was so intimidating. That's very healthy, and I hope you keep evolving in that direction. That's my goal too, is to always feel more connection and love to all kinds of people, all people when possible.
I guess I'll leave on one thing.
Yeah.
Men have played just the scope and breadth of the activity of men, past, present, future, is really something else. Because on one side, we're responsible for all the wars, the ecological destruction of the planet, and all kinds of savagery. And with a few notable exceptions, men laid the sewer pipes in the neighborhood, and they framed that cottage you're in and painted the walls. They connected the power lines. And they invented a lot of neat stuff that we all use and can't do without. So I feel like my wish for our society is that we start to take a view of men that, while not glazing over faults, is also willing to truly embrace the upsides of activities of men as well.
I connect with that a lot, and I like that as an ending note, because I do think that men in general deserve a bit more sympathy because of how tough it can be to have to keep a certain persona, mask your emotions so much of the time, live amongst men that are doing that, even if you're trying your best not to do that, and, you know, kind of be trapped in those dynamics. And like all human beings, we're doing our best. And I think it's an optimistic idea to try to give the benefit of the doubt.